lecture, we discussed list, a data structure in Python. A quick recap. So far, we discussed 3 data structures, including integer, float, and strings, a sequence of characters. We also discussed loops and selection statements. We use loops when we want to repeat a procedure or an action several times. So we had 2 types of loops, definite iterations and indefinite iterations. For definite iterations, we already know how many times we want to repeat that procedure, 10 times, 100 times. But for indefinite iterations, we use a condition, and that condition should be checked at each iteration. We also had selection statements, if-else statement, when we want to check several conditions and then run the program based on the result. So if that condition holds, do this procedure, otherwise do the other one. Also, Python is a strongly typed language. It means that it's case sensitive. We need to be careful. Sometimes we have spent a few hours just realize that there was a typo in variable's name, and that was the reason that we get the syntax error. We also discussed a few troubleshooting techniques. So I uploaded a task form code, and I asked you to identify its errors. So there are 3 main strategies that we have learned so far. We always check variable's name. For example, if they are all uppercases, then we need to make sure that when we call them, we follow the same format. The other item that we should check is the variable initialization. When we define a variable, we always initialize it. We assign a value. And we typically do that outside of a loop body. Also, under while loops, when we have while true, because the condition here is true, we need to have a break statement. Otherwise, we run into infinite loops. It means that it never stops. Let's go over a couple of review quizzes. And again, I suggest that you pause the video, read the question, find the best answer, and then listen to the rest of the recording. So consider the following code segments. Okay, there we have a variable which is initialized outside of the loop. Then we have a while loop with a condition. We print the variable and then we subtract 1 from that variable. So the question is, what is the output produced by this code? Okay, we can trace the algorithm manually. Okay, count is 5. 5 is always larger than 1, so the condition is correct. Then we print count. So the first number is 5. So 5 minus 1 becomes 4. 4 is still greater than 1, so the condition is met, so we print 4. Okay, so we continue this until count is equal to 1. So 1 is not larger than 1, so the condition is not correct, so we stop. So here the right answer is D, 5, 4, 3, 2. Because 1 is not greater than 1, so we don't run that at the last iteration. Next question. Consider the following code segment. So the first review quiz was about a while loop. This one is about a selection statement because we see if-else. So we have 2 variables. We have initialized them, x equal to 5, y equal to 4. Now, if x is greater than y, which is the case here, 5 is greater than 4, now print y. Y is equal to 4. Okay. Otherwise, print x. So the first condition is correct, so we print y, which is 4, and we don't execute the other because it's the else condition. So the right answer here is 4, print y. This condition is hold, then we don't have to go through the rest. Okay. Another review question on while loop. Consider the following code segment. Okay, we have a variable, we initialize it, it's equal to 1, and while count is equal or less than 10, print count. Okay, which of the following describes the error in this code? So for sure there is an error. If you remember last time when we discussed while loop, there was a risk for using a while loop. So if we don't define the termination condition, then we run into infinite loop. It means that it never stops, and that's the case here. So 1 is always equal or less than 10. So that condition is always true. We don't see any break statement. We don't see any termination criteria. So the loop is infinite. This is the right answer. And this is what you need to avoid when you are using the while loop. Now I move on to chapter 5. Please note that we are skipping chapter 4 here. Chapter 4 is about the text files, how to read from text file, how to write in text files, strings, and we will get back to that in week 2. But for now, we skip chapter 4 and start chapter 5, which is about lists. Learning objectives include constructing lists and access items in those lists. How we can create a list and how we can update their value. We use different methods to manipulate lists. A list is a new data structure in Python and allows the programmer to manipulate a sequence of data values of any type. So we can have a sequence of numbers, we can have a sequence of strings. It doesn't have to be numbers. Lists provide powerful ways to organize data in useful and interesting applications. We have seen lists before, and that's the question here. Do you remember range 10? So this function generates a sequence of numbers by default starting from 0 all the way through 10. And that's a sequence of numbers, and this is a list of numbers. So list is a sequence of data values, items or elements, they are all equivalent. And here you can see some examples. Shopping list for grocery store, to-do list, guest list for a wedding, text document, which is a list of lines, names and a phone book. They are all like a list because it's about the sequence of items, organizing the data sequentially. There is another interesting application, indices in optimization models. So in optimization model, we have decision variables, x sub ij. For example, the number of products to be shipped from customer I to supplier J. I and J can be a list because we have 100 customers. So it's a list of 100 customers. Or we have 3 suppliers. So it's a list of 3 suppliers. Each item in a list has a unique index that specifies its position. So position is assigned to each item in the list. And it starts from 0 to length minus 1. So you are going to see several examples. And we use this index to update values or manipulate values in lists. But for now, remember that each item in a list has a unique index, which shows its position. Here you can see some examples. So for list, we use a square bracket. As you can see here, apples, oranges, cherries. So it's a sequence of 3 items. They are all string. And then next example, you see a list which has 2 lists inside the original one. So 5 and 9 is a list, and then we have another list, and we combine them in one list. So it's possible to have several lists inside a single list. When an element is an expression, its value is included in the list. So here, we import math. We define a variable named x equal to 2, and then we have a list. This list has 2 items. The first one is x, and the other one is the square root of that number. And that's why we are importing math module. Let's try to implement this. Import math, x equal to 2, and then we have a list. This list has 2 items, and if you run this, the first item shows the value for x, which is equal to 2, and the next item is its square root. Now let's say we want to have x plus 1. So the result would be another list, but we updated its value. And again, whenever you see this bracket, the square bracket, it means that the data structure is a list. And this is the example you have here. List of integers can be built using range. We have seen this. When we were defining for loops, we used range function just to generate a sequence of integers. So in this example, as you can see here, we have a variable first equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. We can also generate the same variable using range. We just need to update its default value, so it starts from 1 and then through 5. So first and second, technically, their values are the same. The list function can build a list from any iterable sequence of elements. Okay, so list is another built-in function which makes everything a list. So in this example, you can see that we have a string, hi there. We apply list to it, then it becomes a list. And let's see what it looks like. Let's run this. I'm defining a variable called third, and it's a list. So you can see the color is green because it's a reserved word. And now I have this sentence, hi there. Now let's print this. So you can see that each character becomes an item in the list. So hi, and then we have a space. So the space is another element, and then the rest of characters. So when we apply list, everything becomes a list, a sequence of elements. Now let's talk about list and some useful operators. Len, a square bracket, and equality signs work on list as expected. Len is another function which returns the number of items in the list, or a number of characters. So let's apply len to one of the variables that we defined. The color is green. So len, we want to know how many items we have in variable named first, which is a list. So in first we have 4 items, so its length is equal to 4. I also mentioned that each item in a list has a position, a unique position, and we can access to that position if we call it. So let's say first 0. So by default, the very first item, its position is 0. The next one is 1, 2, 3. So first 0 should return 1. So it means that show the value with position 0. Now we can try first 2, for example. So this is 0, 1, 2, we expect 3. Okay, so the third item in the list. Now let's say we want to have several items in the list. Let's say 2 through 4. So I use 2 colon 4. It means I go and find the item in position 2. So 0, 1, 2. And the next one is 3. So I expect just 3 and 4 as a result. So you can see 3 and 4. Concatenation and equality also work as expected. So it means that we can combine 2 lists using plus sign. So let's do that. First plus another list. So I use the square bracket, and it has 2 items, 5 and 6. When you run it, then you see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 and 6 is added to its end. can also test the equality. For example, we want to know if first is equal to second. So here, the values for first and seconds are the same. So let's run this and see what we get. The value is true. It means that first is equal to second. So we can apply concatenation and equality as well. To print the content of a list, we can apply print. There are two examples here. Print this string and then print the list because you see the bracket, and then the data structure remains the same. So 1, 2, 3, 4 inside the bracket. Here's a useful operator, which is in. In detects the presence of an element. So we have a sequence of items. We want to check whether or not 3 is in that list or other element. So we write, okay, 3, this is a target value in list. If 3 is in the list, the output is true, otherwise it's false. So this is a very useful operator if you want to search for a specific item in the list. A list is mutable. Elements can be inserted, removed, or replaced. It means that we can update them. The list itself maintains its identity, but its state, its length, and its content can change. Subscript operator is used to replace an element. Okay. In this example, I have defined a variable called example 1, 2, 3, 4, and now I want to update the value in position 3. Okay, by default, the first item's position is 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we update its value and it's equal to 0, we expect to see 1, 2, 3, 0. And that's how we access items inside the list, and we can update them. So let's quickly run this. So example equal to list 1, 2, 3, 4. And then example, the item in position 3 equal to 0. We run it. And now let's print the variable. So it's 1, 2, 3, 0 now. So that's how we update items. Subscript is used to reference the target of the assignment, which is not in the list but an element's position within it. So it's the element position, not its value. Remember this. Now, the following code shows how to replace each number in a list with its square. So we just want to practice that how we can update elements. But when we want to update elements, we can perform calculation. For example, we want to replace everything with their exponentiation, right? Or with a square value. So this is the first example. The next example is to use a split method, and then, as you can expect, we split a sentence into different words. And then we want to apply some formatting rules. For example, if we want to make all characters uppercases or lowercases, there are many built-in functions in Python that we can use. Let's start with the first example here, that we want to replace each number in a list with its square. So let's say I define a variable called numbers. It's a list, so I use a square bracket. The values are 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I want to go through all items and update them. So for that, we are going to repeat an action several times, so we can use a for loop, as we learned last time. So after for loop, we expect a variable. I go with index, but it's totally, you can change this variable name. It's arbitrary. for index in range, so the input argument for range should be an integer number. So here we want to repeat this based on the number of items that we have in a list. So I can calculate the length or apply the length function to this list. So len numbers returns the number of items in the list, that here is 4. So for index in range 4, it means repeat this 4 times. Then numbers index, go to their position starting from 0, which is the first one. Numbers index is equal to numbers index. So what we have inside the bracket is the position of the item raised to 2. Right, and then after we are done with this for loop, we want to print this variable. Okay. If you run this, you can see that each value is replaced by its square, 4, 9, 16, 25. So we use list. We also use a for loop to go through all items in the list, and then we updated their value. The next example is to use the string method split to extract a list of words. Split is the new function, and you are going to see how it works. Let's say I have a variable called sentence, and it's a string, so I'm using quotation mark, writing a sentence. This example has 5 words. This is a variable and its type is a string. Now I want to apply the split function and assign it to a new variable. So I define a new variable, words, sentence, dot split. Now I want to split the sentence by a space. So it means that go through all characters. If you see the first space, then split it. Continue, and if you see the next space, then split it. So if you run this, you can see how it splits the sentence. Now we have a list, and each item is the word. This example has 5 words. So this list is a sequence of strings because you still see the single quotation marks. And now let's say we want to go through all items in this list and make all characters uppercases. Okay. So for that, I need to define a for loop again. For loop index in range, it expects an integer number. So I apply len to words. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We know that there are 5 items, so it's technically range of 5. And then go to the position of each item, words index, and then apply this method, upper. It makes every character an uppercase. And let's see how it looks. Okay. So you can see that all words are in uppercases. And we just did it with upper. If you want to make all lowercase, then you apply lower. So there are many useful functions in Python that can be used for formatting the output of your code. And these are just a few examples. Now I would like to discuss some list methods that we use a lot when we want to read data from text file or Excel files. These methods are really useful. The list type includes several methods for inserting and removing elements, and we are going to see how they work in several examples. The first list method is append, which adds element to the end of L, and we usually use append when we want to read data from external files from text files or Excel sheets. L.extend adds the elements of a list to the end of L, so technically if we want to combine two lists, we can use extend. Also, L.insert. Insert element at index, at the position, if index is less than the length of L. Otherwise, insert element at the end of L. We also have pop, which removes and returns the element at the end of L. So if we want to remove the items, we use the pop method. If you want to go to a specific item, so it accepts an input argument index, which removes the element at the specified index. So we have a few examples here. Let's start with insert. The method insert expects an integer index and the new element as argument. So two input arguments where you want to insert the new value. Let's try to run this. So I have a variable example and it's a list with two items, 1 and 2. Now I want to apply the insert method. Example.insert. We need to pass two input arguments, 1 and 10. It means I go and find position 1, which is here, and then put 10 there. Let's see what it looks like. So 1, 10, 2. So now you can see that it adds 10 to the list. Let's try another example. Example.insert 3, 25. Go and find position or index 3, 0, 1, 2. So we'll see this at the end. 0, 1, 2, 3, this is position 3 and its value is 25. And that's how we use method insert. The method append expects just the new element as an argument and adds the new element to the end of the list. And that's why we use this when we read input data from text files. So here you can see the example. So we start with the same variable 1 and 2. Example.append 3. It means that add 3 to the end of this list. And then your list will have 3 items with 3 at the end. The method extend performs a similar operation but adds the elements of its list argument to the end of the list. So technically when we want to combine two lists, we use extend. Example.extend. It means that add this list to the end of the other list. So 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, and then you will see 11, 12, 13. You can also apply plus sign, example plus 14 and 15, then 14 and 15 will be added to the end. So these are just a few examples, so you can see how we use append, extend, and insert. Now this one is about pop method. The method pop is used to remove an element at a given position. Okay. If you don't specify the position, it removes the very last element. So, for example is 1, 2, 10, 11, 12, 13. Apply pop, it drops 13. Then your new list has 1, 2, 10, 11, and 12. But if you want to remove the first element, so its position is 0. So example.pop 0, it removes 1, and then you end up with this list. In summary, a list is a sequence of 0 or more elements, can be manipulated with the subscript, concatenation, comparison, and in operator if we want to search for specific elements in the list. We use in operator. And it is a mutable data structure. It means that we can update number of items, their values, and we can access them.